Just ahead on American Black Journal, Wayne County Executive Warren Evans is here to talk about his family's deep roots in African American history. Plus, we'll take an historical look at black women in advertising and a special report on legendary artist Charles McGee. Stay right there. American Black Journal starts now.
American Black Journal is funded by the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, a partner with communities where children come first.
How does diversity bring energy to us all? At DTE Energy, we believe that it's the contributions of all that build great communities. As a company, we grow stronger by welcoming the unique perspectives of everyone. As community members, we support our state's broad culture and heritage. From working closely with women and minority-owned suppliers to embracing our local cultures, DTE Energy is powering diversity. The DTE Energy Foundation is a proud sponsor of Detroit Public Television. Masco Corporation is proud to manufacture innovative and environmentally friendly products for the home. Delta Faucets, Craft-Made in Merillat cabinets, and Behr brand paints have all been designed with you in mind. Masco and its family of companies, serving Michigan communities since 1929.
Throughout my whole life, I've been judged based how I look and where I'm from.
According to the status quo, I'm not supposed to be standing here.
We have given up so much of who we are because we've allowed other people to tell our stories.
About now, it's about moving forward and where we want the narrative of black men to go.
We can do this.
One man could change the world. That one man could change the world.
Welcome to American Black Journal. I'm Stephen Henderson. It's Black History Month, and Detroit is a city that is really rich with African American achievements. On today's program, we're bringing you a few of those stories. We start with the family roots of Wayne County Executive Warren Evans. He grew up with a front row seat to the civil rights movement, given his family was closely aligned with a lot of the black leaders in that period. His family was also connected to the historic Idlewild Resort and Dunbar Hospital, which was Detroit's first and only black hospital. I'm pleased to have Wayne County Executive Warren Evans as my guest today. Welcome back.
Thanks, Stephen. Good to be here.
Yeah, so I have to say, this is something I don't think I knew about you.
Okay.
this
Hopefully there are a few of those.
Yeah, right? This rich history connection that you have, family connection to civil rights movement and the sort of African American firsts here in the city.
Very, very strong family for advocacy for black folks for a long time. My grandfather, Dr. Albert B. Clegg Sr., was the first city physician in Receiving Hospital, first person of color as a city physician there, active in food co-ops in the neighborhood. You know, his son became a prominent minister in Detroit, an advocate for causes at ages where you just absorbed it. You didn't necessarily know what was going on, but you grew into it.
Sure. Yeah. So talk about, I mean, we should talk more about Clegg in particular and that connection, because that's a name that I think most people do know and know the history of it. But I'm really curious about, you know, growing up here in the city, how all of that played out for you and how it influenced the things that you do today and the person that you are.
I think it certainly was a significant influence. So much of it when I was young, I absorbed it as it seemed as a part of regular day-to-day activity, and until you get older and realize what a unique experience this was. My family, mother and father, had in the basement of their home the offset printing for the Illustrated News, which was much like a Michigan Chronicle, a weekly in that period of time. And, you know, I come home from school, the movers and shakers in the black community, activists in the black community, were sitting there in the basement. Printing the paper, talking about next week's paper, that sort of thing. And so not many kids grow up to come home and maybe you got Martin Luther King there. Maybe you got Coleman Young in the basement. Maybe you've got Ron Karenga in the basement. Maybe you've got H. Rap Brown in the basement. You know, folks talking about, you know, the civil rights movements and the import of it. I mean, I always was smart enough to go sit down on the stairs and listen. It was fascinating to me. I just didn't know the overall significance and importance at such a young age, maybe 15, 16.
Yeah. Do you feel like your professional life now reflects things that you heard or saw at that time in terms of these sort of giants of the civil rights era?
Absolutely, with a real understanding that public service is, you know, something to treasure and to do. You don't do it for you. You don't get rich here. Right. You know, it's something that you do because it's the right thing to do, and the importance of social justice and the importance of, you know, inclusion and the importance of diversity. If you look at my staff today, you'll see just how much I learned about inclusion and diversity in terms of people. And I don't give it a second thought because it's the natural way that I am. Yeah. But I'm sure it came from what I learned.
Yeah. Let's talk about Klieg in particular and the role that he played in the civil rights movement, that era. I mean, that's a big name here in Detroit.
Yeah. Reverend Albert B. Klieg was the founder of the Shrine of the Black Madonna, a social activist, significant social activist through, you know, I remember the Freedom Now Party, and there are a few people probably out there old enough to remember.
that.
And the significance of the Freedom Now Party was trying to get, you know, black voters acclimated to the fact that you really can vote for black people. And there really are some qualified people of color out here to run for offices. And so those campaigns back in those days, you rode around in a sound car with a little PA system, you know, talking to folks. And I remember vividly doing that as a kid. And, you know, watching for the election results and just kind of watching the evolution of Detroit as it grew, at least in some stature for people of color, and all of the pitfalls and things that come with that process. Because people do not cede power anywhere voluntarily. There's always going to be a push for equity.
Right. When you talk about the shrine, you know, the thing that's associated most with that, I think, in people's minds is radical black politics and radical activism. Talk about how that relates to the things that you do now. I mean, I think most people who know you think of you as a very level-headed, moderate office holder, and wouldn't connect you necessarily to that. Talk about how you...
I think it's evolution. I think what was radical then is mainstream today in many respects, and so it's the evolution of a process. How do people perceive it?
That's interesting. That's an interesting way to put that. So you don't see the politics of the shrine as somehow different than the things that...
no, it was advocacy for equity for people of color. And thank God, in many respects, that has worked, and there are more people of color in the decision-making process, which changes and evolves things. So the same advocacy of the 60s is not necessarily the same prototype, you know, for 2020.
I've got you here, and I want to make sure I ask just a little bit about transit while you're here. You have stepped out front of that debate regionally and really put it on your shoulders. We're seeing some other people slump in their chairs, I think, right now. How worried are you that we won't get another bite at that apple?
I'm cautiously optimistic and slightly worried at the same time. I mean, I think putting off transit is almost tantamount to saying I don't want it. And I think we've seen with the Amazon bid and others, people can argue about not getting it, but the truth of the matter is not only that we didn't get it, we didn't even make it into the top 20. And one of the functional issues was your lack of ability to move people from one place to the other in a significant way. And while that's not the only issue, don't minimize the importance of the issue. So we need to do something, I think, regionally for transit, and I'm not so sure we get there, but it won't be from a lack of work on our part. My staff has been working on transit every day since April. along with the other stakeholders trying to pull something together. So it hasn't been a Johnny-come-lately approach to it, but it's a hurdle that we've been fighting for 40 years, and hopefully we don't fight it another 40.
Keep after it, and we just never get there. If we don't get it this year, then what?
Well, you hear people say, let's put it off till 2020 for whatever reason. I'm just not so sure that 2020 isn't a code word for let's just put it off.
Yeah.
People can argue, well, have a smart millage coming up, so you don't want to put it up at the same time. I mean, I think things stand for themselves. I mean, either you're for the regional approach or you're not. And in every region, you're going to have disparities in income. You're going to have differences in who lives where and what. But if you really believe we need to be able to move people back and forth, fill jobs that are there, get people to the educational institutions, get to the airport and back in a way that makes a lot of sense, that does attracts investors and it attracts opportunities in people. And for the region to grow, we need that.
Well, I would imagine that your ancestors here in Detroit would be very proud of the work you're doing there. So
I hope they would be.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Up next, a history lesson on black women in the advertising business. But first, we're taking a look back at some of the guests on this program over the past 50 years. Here's a 1993 Detroit Black Journal interview with filmmaker Robert Townsend about his movie, Meteor Man.
Do you feel that there are a lack of role models in movies today?
Well, as it relates to African Americans, I mean, I think, when people say Robert Townsend, I represent kind of the balance factor. I mean, my movies will always have a level of, integrity, quality. I'm going to go for things that'll make people laugh, things that'll make people cry. This particular film, there have been no films for African American children. I think that's important, that they have something. They can go see Home Alone or Sandlot, but I think it's kind of refreshing to see themselves on the screen and somebody that looks like them fighting and standing for something and having some kind of courage rather than being the second banana or the sidekick. But if anything, if somebody says Robert Townsend, I'm an image buster. I always want to do something to say that there's another side.
My next guest wrote a book about the trailblazing black women who launched advertising careers during the 1960s Mad Men era. The book is titled Pioneering African American Women in the Advertising Business. Many of the women made history by opening their own agencies and receiving prestigious recognition for their work. Joining me now is the book's author, Judy Foster Davis, a marketing professor at Eastern Michigan University. Welcome to American Black Journal.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I love this story because I think lots of people have been sort of turned on to the idea of the advertising industry and it's sort of in its heyday by that television program, Mad Men, which made it look so much fun and interesting. They got to some of the gender dynamics that were at work in that era. They got to a little bit of the racial dynamics. This sort of puts that out front center and says this was one of the major issues in that industry at that time and going forward even.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
It was a huge issue in the industry where we had protests and all kinds of things going on because you didn't have people of color, African Americans represented in the industry, whatsoever. But the Mad Men show was somewhat of a false narrative because there were African Americans coming up in the industry, small numbers, but they were there. And one of the reasons why I decided to write this book was because I wanted to correct that false narrative, and I didn't want these histories to be lost.
Yeah.
Some of these women, one is deceased, another is retired and a senior citizen, and I said, well, if I don't tell these stories, who will?
Who's going to do it?
And it's just so important. The theme is, tell our stories.
Yeah.
I think that ought to be a hashtag.
Yeah, right. And in addition to sort of coming up in the industry, I mean, you're talking about people who went out and said, I'm going to do it on my own because that's the way I will really get to sort of shine. And I would imagine that when they did that, though, I mean, that's a harder road because it's always harder to do it on your own, but it's an even harder road here because of the barriers, the gender barrier and the race barrier both working against you.
Well, what was interesting is that there were African American men in the industry as well. And prior to about the late 1960s, many could not get hired in a mainstream advertising company.
Yeah.
So they went out and they started their own companies. Now, interestingly, the main women that I profile in this book did work for mainstream ad agencies, and they did so in important managerial positions, oftentimes, you know, the first in that particular area. And then they went on and started agencies under their own names. And what I thought was interesting is that what I got from the research is that they did it so that they could have control over the environment and the decision making and all of that. One of the things that I think is particularly problematic today is that on some level I think the industry has regressed. And look at some of the ad campaigns that have come out recently that have been subject to all kinds of criticism.
These big mistakes.
You know, you've got, you know, Pepsi with that Kendall Jenner ad, and you've had the H&M with the boy wearing the black boy wearing the monkey hoodie, and the Dove ad where the black woman takes off her top to reveal a white woman.
She's white, yeah.
And so it makes you wonder.
It's always who's in the room?
Who had a seat at the
who's
table?
In the room when this got
absolutely
when this got decided? Yeah.
And in many cases we're not at the table, or we're marginalized.
Yeah.
And by that I mean that in the mainstream agencies there are often these, you know, multicultural departments or ethnic cells where the people of color tend to be placed. Or if you're an African American or Latino or Asian and you participate in this business as an entrepreneur, then you have to serve the black consumer market,
You're not getting
the Hispanic market, the Asian market. You don't get the opportunities that the others get to participate in the mainstream pieces of the business, and I think that's one reason why we see some of the blunders that we see today.
So I mean, in that way, then some of what we saw these women do, the sacrifices that they made, the barriers that they smashed through, maybe didn't pay off the way we thought. Is that an accurate assessment of it?
I think, you know, as I mentioned, there has been some regression, you know, in the business. And I think it's important that what's happening now, that these things are being called out and people are asking who has a seat at the table. And I think a major factor behind that now is that we have social media where, you know, any person can put out a question or a criticism.
Yeah, I saw this ad, why does this look like this?
And it can go viral. And I think it has really made the companies behind the ads and their agencies really stop and pay attention. And, you know, I think personally that if there were more diversity at the table, you would see the different viewpoints. In fact, I can share a story with you about an ad campaign that was killed because there was a woman of color at the table. Carolyn Jones, who is from the state of Michigan and graduated from the University of Michigan. She was working on an ad campaign as a consultant to a mainstream agency, and they wanted to run an ad with the tagline, Aunt Jemima is alive and cooking.
Wow.
And literally, if you study the history of how Aunt Jemima was marketed, they would have live black women go out to these fairs and exhibits and events and make pancakes and serve them to you know, the masses in an exhibition forum. And she knew that was problematic. So she talked them out of using that concept, and I said good for her, because that would have gone down in one of those lists of blunders.
Are we still in that era where that's
exactly, and this was in the 1990s,
and we're
so we aren't talking about ancient history.
Some of the Aunt Jemima imagery that was used. Yeah.
If you look at the Aunt Jemima ads these are from the 1920s, there's another one from Cream of Wheat. You had advertisements that showed African Americans in extremely derogatory fashions as, you know, slave mammies and coons and toms and all of that, and just normal products like, you know, soap powder and breakfast foods and
they become
coffee
racialized.
This became kind of the norm with respect to what was presented. And the presence of African Americans in the business literally helped to change the face of advertising and how we were presented in ads, and that carries on to this day.
Yeah.
That's not to say that we don't see problematic executions, because obviously we do. We just talked about some. But it did make a difference, and it heightened the sensitivities. And then if you think about it, if you wanted to sell products to African Americans or other people of color, I mean, could you really show them in that manner and have them go out
and go buy it
and buy your products? I don't think so.
It wouldn't work. Okay. Well, congratulations on the book and on all of the work.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks for being here. Finally today, 93-year-old African-American artist Charles McGee has paved the way for a lot of people here in Detroit. His work can be found all over the city, and the latest is a mural that spans 11 stories on the side of a downtown building. Our colleagues at the Detroit Performs TV series spent some time with the legendary artist.
The world is my canvas. I'm just one little speck on that canvas. It's trying to understand the order that holds the world together. That's very important to me, because I think that if we understand it, we respect it. When we all work together, we understand more. We tolerate more. We live better lives because we're talking about being moved by togetherness. We're able to live together harmoniously. I think art tries to help to understand where we are and achieve order out of our existence. It's important for me to try to understand what it is that nature gives us in existence, to make reason out of why we are who we are. I live in awe of the beautiful things that nature imparts on us. I create pieces when it's not a physical involvement. It's a continual investigation with some kind of purpose and understanding of trying to make the world better. And so the mural, in my situation, the reason that I used the imagery that I did was to create that juxtaposition of opposites. It balances out, and it's telling you about the order in the world, because nature didn't want there to be just one of anything. So that kind of dichotomy of opposites creates harmony, creates diversion. For me, it's pointing toward peace through that kind of organization, and that's why I think I'm hungry to create, because I think that was my call in nature, was to be able to make a mark, make another mark that balances that mark. We live in a rapid changing world, and it's very important we learn to adjust ourselves to these changes. We all gonna make mistakes. We're working toward a better world, each from their own direction, according to their experiences and how open our outlooks are. It takes time, it takes experience, and requires a lot of giving and understanding to get us through this maze of life in peace. And so the basic thesis behind everything that I do has to do with trying to make it better. It's very important to be able to understand the insides of our ocular system, and why, if we look at one color, close our eyes, we see the after image of that particular object, and it's complementary. That's just one element of understanding. Everything is rapidly metamorphosizing. There's a little more unity, I feel. There's a little more understanding. I look around, I'm really, I feel greatly accelerated by the newness that's happening to Detroit. I thought I'd never live to see it. I feel fortunate to be a part of that, being able to put a fingerprint on the building of New Detroit.
That's our program for today. Thanks for watching. You can get more information about all of our guests at AmericanBlackJournal.org. And as always, you can connect with us on Facebook and on Twitter. We'll see you next time.
As American Black Journal looks ahead at the next 50 years, we want to hear from you, the viewers. Tell us what you think of this program and what you'd like to see on future episodes. Visit AmericanBlackJournal.org to take a quick survey and share your opinion. Thank you.
American Black Journal is funded by the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, a partner with communities where children come first.
How does diversity bring energy to us all? At DTE Energy, we believe that it's the contributions of all that build great communities. As a company, we grow stronger by welcoming the unique perspectives of everyone. As community members, we support our state's broad culture and heritage. From working closely with women and minority-owned suppliers to embracing our local cultures, DTE Energy is powering diversity. The DTE Energy Foundation is a proud sponsor of Detroit Public Television. Masco Corporation is proud to manufacture innovative and environmentally friendly products for the home. Delta faucets, craft-made in Merilite cabinets, and Behr brand paints have all been designed with you in mind. Masco and its family of companies, serving Michigan communities since 1929.
Throughout my whole life, I've been judged based how I look and where I'm from.
According to the status quo, I'm not supposed to be standing here.
We have given up so much of who we are because we've allowed other people to tell our stories.
About now, it's about moving forward and where we want the narrative of black men to go.
We can do this.
One man could change the world. That one man could change the world.